So, the Boston Celtics have finally given Jaylen Brown a contract, and it is indeed a supermax. Obviously, we've been waiting for this contract for a very long time because I think both sides here, obviously Jaylen Brown was in favor of a supermax, but in the case of Boston, they were definitely reluctant to give him this money. And it makes sense because this will amount to annually $61 million per year. Hello everybody, welcome to Oscar Rusty Bucket. Subscribe to the channel if you have not already and drop a like on this video. It only takes 1 second. It makes a massive difference in how the video performs in the YouTube algorithm. Now, Jaylen Brown is young enough that you're not really too worried about him getting this money when he's like older. I think the last year of his contract, if I'm guessing correctly as to how old Jaylen Brown is, he should be like 31 or 32 when this expires. But it's a shitload of money. It's 30% of $1 billion. And obviously, this is controversial. And obviously, at least to me, this is an overpay because Jaylen Brown, to me, is not in the caliber of player who would be worthy of such a large amount of the salary cap. Now, let me be clear about this because there has been some confusion as to where I stand on situations like this in regards to players being overpaid because Jaylen Brown is being overpaid in this instance. I'm glad when a player gets their money. I just always am. So I'm not like wishing Jaylen Brown didn't make this money, but I am going to be critical of Boston's front office to some extent for having given him this money. I'm glad that Jaylen got paid. It's good for him, but I think it's stupid that Boston paid him $60 million a year. Potentially still going to be fine. I think everybody, pretty much universally, well, not universally, but among most NBA fans, people overreact to contracts. People treat a bad contract as though it is the most debilitating thing in the world. And under certain circumstances, it can definitely be debilitating. But especially with how big the salary cap is right now, having one player take like 40% of it isn't the biggest deal in the world. Again, not ideal, but not the biggest deal in the world. Really, where this is an issue isn't with Jaylen and what he makes individually, but rather how much money other Boston Celtics players are making. You obviously have Porzingis. I believe he signed an extension with them for even more money. Obviously, you have to pay Jason Tatum even more than Jaylen Brown when his next contract extension comes up. And it's just a lot of money committed to this team, so much money committed to this team that you're probably not going to be able to do much to change it. If this team gets to a point where it's like, clearly this isn't going to work and we need to make some large-scale change, well, that's going to be very difficult because you're kind of deadlocked in salary. As for why Jaylen Brown is not worth $60 million a year, man, it's not like Jaylen Brown's not good. I've seen a lot of people act as though Jaylen Brown's not good just because he had that awful Game 7. And one thing that has always been a pet peeve of mine is when people act as though a player and their overall performance is who they are as a player is dictated by one game. Obviously, I think it was 7 or 8 turnovers in Game 7 versus Miami. Not good, but he was good in the series otherwise, and he was especially excellent in the first 2 series before it. So for that case, like, Jaylen Brown overall had a good playoffs. He just ended it about as horribly as you possibly could in terms of an individual performance. But Jaylen was not worth this money well before that 8 turnover game happened. I always felt as though the season that he was having this year was a little bit of an inflation in terms of like his stats made him appear as though he was a much better player than he was, when in reality, to me, I didn't get the impression that Jaylen Brown improved that much. He definitely improved, but not by some gigantic margin, whereas we obviously did see a pretty gigantic margin in terms of his statistics, and I think that was just a matter of the team was feeding him the ball more because they knew he was in a contract year and were trying to help him out. That's just kind of the vibe that I got the whole year. And, good for them. I like that they did that as a team. It's probably contradictory to the narrative that just everyone in Boston hates each other. But ultimately slightly inflated numbers for the fact of it being a contract year to offset the fact that Jaylen Brown is not a supermax caliber guy. He made an all defensive team this year, which I think is what made, or an all NBA team rather, which I think is what qualified him. But yeah, he just isn't like a top 10 player in the league. And at best, he's like at the bottom of the top 20. And me personally, I probably wouldn't have him in my top 25 even. So to pay Jaylen Brown that much money is rough. It just is. But at the same time, losing him would have also been rough. And that's kind of the place you are in as a franchise under the Supermax, which is, look, the Celtics would be better with Jaylen at 60 mil, I would say, typically, than they would be without him. Him at 40 mil, let's say, is far more reasonable. Obviously, the outcome you would like to have if you were Boston, but that's not really how this goes. Yeah, the Supermax, I like that players get paid. I'm always in favor of players getting paid because ultimately, no matter how many millions of dollars these players have, they do not really hold the power in the relationship of employee and employer. Sure, other employers would give Jaylen that money. That's why he gets so damn much. But ultimately, there is a power dynamic where Jaylen is at the bottom of that, fighting his way up. Yes, I understand he's fighting his way up towards $60 million a year, but the people who give him that money are making billions, so still that power dynamic exists. I understand why people don't really sympathize as much for it because it's $60 million per year, but at the end of the day, I'm going to be in favor of the employee 100% of the time. Shout out to the Writers Guild and the Acting Guild, and I think it's UPS that's doing striking. Yes, unions are good. Join a union if there is one in the job that you work in, but that is a whole side tangent. My overall point, Jaylen Brown overpaid, but also you kind of had to do it. So that leaves with Boston in this circumstance, you kind of got to just win with this team. Like if this team isn't enough, then guess that sucks, man. Guess it just isn't enough, and that's just what it ends up being. Because really, there's not a lot of stuff you can move around. There's not a lot of stuff in terms of assets. They do have, I think, most, if not all of their future first-round picks, so that helps. They can either use that to draft win-now talent on the back end of the draft, or, of course, trade those picks for potentially other impactful players. But it's going to have to be impactful players who are either not making a significant amount of money or are, you know, replacing like Derek White, which you don't really want to do. Maybe Malcolm Brogdon is the one contract that you feel pretty comfortable trading, but that is about it. And I've obviously previously mentioned with the Celtics team going into this year, I didn't love the Porzingis Marcus Smart swap as much as a lot of people did. I ultimately will agree that it was a move that made them a better team. However, I do wonder if the culture difference will end up actually really mattering for this team, especially because we've seen the Celtics suck at actually being a basketball team, but get through it with their perseverance, and maybe that doesn't exist when it's Porzingis talking in the locker room instead of Marcus, even though Marcus had his negative things on the other end of the spectrum. But yeah, my overall take is it's a lot of damn money. You kind of had to do it, which blows, but at the same time, I do have to criticize you a little bit for putting your franchise in this position. That said, the Celtics are still in a better position than there's maybe 3 or 4 teams that I would say have a better chance of winning a championship this year. Not even 4. Like the Nuggets and the Bucks and the Heat if they get Dame, and that's pretty much it. Maybe even not the Bucks, but yeah. Anyways, shout out to Rudy for editing this video, and goodbye.